Thank you, Megan. So I'm a little nervous here because of the lead up. I mean, this is really a lot of pressure on the introduction. But I see a few. I was thinking of doing the same one I did on Monday for Steve, but I see some people who are there on Monday, so I can't really do the same thing. But the fact that I see people who were there on Monday is a little bit of testament to Steve's abilities to lead a discussion, moderate a discussion, to pick out the most important topics of the day. And in this case, he picked them out months in advance. Um, and just as important is your own interest in playing your part to be a member, as Steve is trying to, I believe, of the informed citizenry that Thomas Jefferson referred to when he said, a well-informed citizenry is the best defense against tyranny. And so Steve in this class and the one he moderates on Monday is in the front lines of that defense. So Monday, I gave a little quiz to see how well we knew Steve, who came to OLLI as a student at a branch in Florida. Then he volunteered. Then he became an instructor. Now he's a board member. And this semester, he's actually leading 2 different classes. So the pressure's on, Steve. It's going to be, what are you going to do next semester? How many classes are you going to be doing? But anyway, in the quiz, we learned that Steve was born not in Miami, Florida, but in Detroit, that he had a career not as a long-haul truck driver between Florida and Pittsfield, but in real estate development. He came to the Berkshires not because of T.O.'s hot dogs, but because of an evening at Tanglewood, and that he loves baking not vegan torts, but lemon cookies. And what's also true, and I wonder if this is a skill he learned over many years in his career in real estate, is that he's an exceptionally good persuader. I've been on the end of several of his arm-twisting phone calls, and what he's done for this class is persuade a lot of people who are experts in their fields to share their expertise in that field. So thank you very much, Steve. Looking forward to it.
All right, John, thank you very much. I have to just say this, that this class was put together by Jenny O'Leary, and I have to give her credit for that, not me. But I appreciate your thoughts anyway, and I'll be back to talk to you again about doing more classes for us. John, by the way, before we go any further, does a great decisions class. He's also done lectures for us on Election 2020, and he does a great hiking class. So anyhow, thank you. So today's topic is going to be, we're talking about the pros and cons of online education. We have 2 very informed presenters. The first one is Natalia Ireland. Natalia is a native of Ricane, now living in Pittsfield, has a bachelor's degree in teaching English as a second language, a master's in English literature, and a PhD in comparative literature. She is currently the site coordinator at the Morningside Community School in Pittsfield. In 2019, Natalia did a class for us on Ukraine in geopolitical context. She will be addressing online learning K through 12. So thank you, Natalia. The second presenter is Gerald Petzerullu. He's the adjunct professor of philosophy and associate director of academic technology at the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts. Gerald has an MA and a PhD from the University of Rochester. He is a Pittsfield native and a graduate of both BCC and MCLA. Gerald has taught several classes for OLLI before. One of them is our robots, moral and pre-Socratic philosophers. I have had the pleasure of taking both of his classes, and he's very enjoyable. And at the end of this, Gerald will be addressing online learning at the university level. So thank you both for coming. So Natalia will be talking first. And what we're going to do is the first thing is, if somebody has a comment, at the bottom of there's a chat box. If you press on the chat box, if you want to ask a question of our presenter, please put it in the chat box. And as time goes on, we'll stop the presenter to talk so they can answer the questions. Okay? The other thing is that you're all muted, and that if at some point we decide to do a blue hand to talk, we'll unmute you, okay? If not, just do your talk through the chat box, all right? The last thing is that be of mind that we're all seeing everybody. So if for any reason you want to eat or do something that we don't want to see, use the stop video, okay? And the reason why you're muted is because if everybody's unmuted, then we all hear the interference from everybody as we did before. All right, thank you all for coming. And Natalia, let's unmute Natalia, please, Russell. Okay, you're ready, Natalia.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm very pleased and honored to be here today with the OLLI community and share my perspective on this urgent topic. I'm by no means consider myself to be an expert in technology, but I am an educator for whom technology became an essential part and actually an essential tool in fulfilling my professional roles and responsibilities during COVID-19 pandemic. So my presentation might lack some loaded technological content, but my focus and my goal was to make it as personal as possible and to talk more about people's experiences dealing with technology during the pandemic, especially in the education, and I'm going to talk about secondary education. So I'll share my screen and my presentation with everyone. And we'll go. So I'll be talking about the role of technology during COVID-19 pandemic in the secondary education. And I would like to discuss this few points with you, the use of technology in the secondary education before COVID-19 pandemic. Then we will talk about fundamental shift in implication of technology in teaching and learning processes during the pandemic. Most of my presentation will be devoted to remote learning and the triad of perspectives and the future prospects of integrating online learning and teaching into secondary education. And of course, there'll be questions and answers time later. So I would like to start today's talk with the quote of Madeline Hunter, who said that every growth requires a temporary loss of security. And that's what I think happened with COVID-19. We all kind of lived in this bubbles of quasi-security, and we were really badly hurt when the virus happened and turned into global pandemic, because suddenly we lost our emotional, social connections, and in a lot of cases, economic stability. Losing all these pieces that create usually the sense of security and comfort for us was very scary, was stressful, and was depressing. But at the same time, like any other disaster, this virus consolidated the society, I believe to some extent, united us, and in a lot of ways became a stimulus for growth, made us think out of the box and become better professionals, and also more important, more empathetic human beings. So my students often use this term before COVID time. So what was happening with technology before COVID happened? For the most part, technology was used in the secondary education as a supplementary tool. Some teachers were using videos and other internet-based resources like YouTube, Momatrix, Khan Academy to supplement what they were teaching in the everyday class. In 2015, the Project Tomorrow survey showed that only 68% of teachers use technology on a daily basis. The rest were using it very rarely or were not using it at all. Therefore, technology was considered to be more of an innovative tool. It wasn't required to use technology, but it was to some extent recommended. Therefore, there was a huge gap between the teachers themselves. Some were pretty comfortable with technology and some teachers were not. Therefore, the enhancement of technological competences in the educational sphere required a lot of time and efforts that some, again, educators were willing to put in and some didn't have enough time. It required new skills and learning constantly new skills and be enthusiastic about implementing all those things, all these technological competences on your own, in your own classroom. And of course, schools and school districts required extensive financial support. So obviously, we came to the point that it was understandable that to meet the requirements of the 21st century, students have to work with technology, and we have to create technology-rich learning environment. In 2013, the Connect Ed initiative was announced by, at that time, President Barack Obama. And the goal for that initiative was to have 99% of American students connected to broadband internet by 2018. It's interesting that in 2013, only 30% of school districts had the connection to the high-speed internet. In 2016, the survey showed that 68% of school districts fully met the Federal Communication Commission's short-term minimum internet bandwidth recommendations for public schools. And in 2019, the survey of 2019, and it was actually about 2018, showed that 98% of the US public school districts were connected to high-speed broadband internet. At the same time, there were almost 2.3 million students who were still left behind. So that was 2019. We had a pretty good, in general, a situation alongside the nation, still having some districts left behind. But what COVID-19 showed, the coronavirus actually exposed a deeper problem, the internet inequality among American families. And when schools closed down in March 2020, we realized that yes, we have internet in our schools, but students don't have internet at home, or the majority of students didn't have the internet at home. So still, the number one problem that schools and districts had to deal with is the access to high-speed internet for students, because it was still varied by student demographics. So March 2020, when we all faced COVID-19 pandemic, showed a kind of a marking point and a shift in the usage of technology. Coronavirus made technology a necessity. Technology from innovation and being supplementary in the classroom became a tool to deliver instruction, communicate, assess students. That's to sustain and make learning process possible at all. So remote learning happened, and I believe that this is the part where I'm going to talk about a lot about personal experiences. And I want to show how the remote learning was perceived and was tackled from the triad of perspectives, from the perspective of a teacher, from a perspective of a student, and from a perspective of a parent. As people, we all went through different complications. As members of society fulfilling our professional roles, we had some similarities and some different challenges that we faced. But in my modest opinion, those who were involved in the educational sphere, we went kind of through three main stages. From stress and sometimes a severe anxiety to adaptation and finding ways how to deal with the new normal way of things, of life. And finally, through empathy and feeling with others, understanding others, we were able to build or restore the connectedness, restore social presence in a virtual setting and with the help of a virtual setting. So stress and anxiety. Similarities that we all went through were uncertainty, unfamiliar public health measures that for a lot of us were new and weird, and maybe to some extent, very strict. Conflicting messages that were coming from the top to the bottom. Everyday new information, everyday conflicting information. Even to digest all that, it was stressful. Of course, we all feel overwhelmed. Enforced self-isolation was causing stress and anxiety. And obviously people who had sick family members or friends. I personally had a friend who lost his mother during the COVID pandemic, and I know that it was very scary, and it's the wound that will never heal. But as teachers, as students and parents, we did have some other things that caused us stress and some differences that we went through. Teachers, mixed messages, of course, that we were receiving every day. Personal and professional anxiety, how to make this work if I don't have enough skills. Little to no technological support for teachers. We were kind of left on our own in a way. Here is Zoom and you have to find out the way. Here is the Google Classroom platform. You have to learn it by a certain date. You have to present and connect with your students. Parents' fears. I probably spent more time than ever on the phone with parents, going through step-by-step instructions, how to get, where to start, how to access information, and what is the most essential steps that they have to learn to help their children. And students' frustration when things don't work, when technology doesn't work, when they don't have that internet to connect to the class and do their assignments. That was all the components that caused a lot of stress to teachers. From the students' part, self-isolation, which caused a lot of depression, lack of support, that they constantly felt like they were not getting enough support from teachers, enough support from families, that they had to deal with a lot of things on their own. Difficulties with establishing routines. For a lot of students, school was the only place that had routines, that had some kind of structure. Losing that structure was devastating, and it was very difficult for them to kind of reestablish and create their own routine, new routine at home. And all this was kind of coming to the lack of motivation. It was difficult, and the four students didn't feel like motivated, didn't feel like it was meaningful for them to keep on trying. And from the parents' perspective, the first and the most important thing that was the most stressful, and we had a lot of parents who lost their income, who lost their sources of income. Another thing, to establish new structure and new routines. They had to work from home. They had to help their children with their education. They had to fulfill other roles. And it was stressful to do all those things at once from home at the same time. And another thing, the ability to provide technological and academic support to children. That was number one thing that parents felt a lot of pressure with, because a lot of our parents didn't have skills to be able to help their children. So all this created a lot of stress, and that was the first stage that we went through. The next phase, the next stage was adaptation. Yes, we all felt like COVID wasn't fair. COVID made us feel frustrated, upset, mad, helpless. But we all went through the same stages to adapt. First of all, we all adapted our mindset. Teachers moved from it's unfair, it's difficult, and we don't have all the same or enough skills to do it, to the stage where we felt like we have to make it work and we will make it meaningful to our students. From an option, again, and from being an innovative and supplementary tool, technology became a necessity and a tool to deliver for us the instruction. So we quickly had to develop new skills. We quickly had to invest in our new classroom through our time, with our ability to connect with students, to learn the ways, new methods to connect with them. Through knowing our learners, we had a new window into the students' homes. We were able to see things that we were not aware of before. We were able to see our students from a different side. So that was a new turning point for us as teachers to kind of learn and get to know our students more and see where we can be more supportive. Through getting to know our learners, we were able to establish this connectedness that was essential to build lesson plans and to make them meaningful to our students, to make sure that they can relate, connect with us, and feel successful. So students, they also change mindset from COVID isn't fair and I can do it to I will try and I will do my best. They also had to develop new skills. A lot of students didn't know how to use technology. For them, technology was more an entertainment. Technology was more, I will spend some time with my friends using social media, share videos and photos. Now technology turned into also a tool for them to be able to access education. It wasn't as much fun as before. It was stressful, but they learned and adjusted, they adapted and learned how to use it. What was new and what they also had to adapt to, new skills to self-manage and self-organize their time and their learning process. We were not there, and sometimes their parents were not there to wake them up so they are in time for their class. They had to learn to do it on their own. Those skills lead to more responsibility and more self-advocacy. Like students learn that in order to be successful, I have to reach out to the teacher and ask for help because that's the only way how the teacher will be able to help me. Those things really made them grow as people, as students, and as learners. And this, I think, was a huge plus that what COVID-19 kind of pushed us with. And now parents' perspective. Of course, parents also had to change their mindset. And from feeling I'm alone and there is nobody to help me, they realized that teachers and administrators were there to support and help. And they realized that this will work. It will be difficult, but this will work. I didn't want to really talk a lot from the parents' perspective. I did ask a few parents to share their opinion. I created a little survey and I asked them to kind of respond and share with us their experience during COVID-19, during the schools closures. So right now I would like just to play their responses and let parents share their experience and how they were able to adapt. So, parent number one.
Hi, my name is Ireland. I am an associate director of admissions at a local independent school, and I have two children. John is 10 and Michael is 9. When school closed in March of 2020, my husband and I were both able to transition to remote work so we could support their learning during the day as well as get our job responsibilities done. The most challenging part of being a working parent during the pandemic and having kids home doing distance learning was the constant disruptions during the day. Everything from, can I have a snack? Can you help me get a drink? To issues with technology, logging on to classes, or even navigating conflicts with siblings. Those were all things that disrupted my ability to do my job during the day. I was lucky that my employer understood that those were going to be challenges, and they were really willing to work around my schedule to make sure that I could fulfill my job obligations as well as meet the needs of my kids. In our home, both of our children transitioned pretty well to remote learning. We did see some advantages to remote learning in the sense
Oh, I'm sorry. Not sure.
That we were really able to understand our children's learning styles and their different needs. I believe a lot more learning happened because they were not dealing with distractions that can happen in a normal classroom. And because work was distributed on like a weekly schedule, we were able to sort of speed up and slow down based on the concepts that they were able to grasp. Well, it gave us a lot more flexibility and covering what they needed to have covered more in depth, but also being able to sort of move through concepts that they were already grasping. My school, children's school, did an excellent job in keeping both parents and students connected to the school. Our teachers called the house weekly. They spoke with both us as parents and with our children to make sure, just really as like a check and connect, make sure everybody was doing all right and understanding what needed to be done. They were available for one-on-one video chats if we needed that, and they were extremely responsive to questions and emails. So we felt completely comfortable reaching out to the school for support. I hope this was helpful, and have a great day.
So this was the comment from one parent, and I had a few commentaries, and I chose two parents that I wanted to share their experiences with you. And why two of them? Because their experiences are totally different. So now I will play another audio and another parent who shares her experience with us, which will be quite different from the one that you just heard.
Hello, my name is Kelly Reagan. I'm a senior claims manager at Guardian Life Insurance Company, and I'm also a licensed attorney. I have one child, a 17-year-old daughter who will be a high school senior this fall. I transitioned to full-time work from home in mid-March of this year due to the pandemic, and I was available to assist my daughter during remote learning if needed. Honors, 16-year-old, mature, fully self-sufficient student. We also have all the technology, laptops, iPads, and high-speed Wi-Fi, and a house large enough for us to split up and not distract each other with our work. However, it soon became obvious to us that the school and most of the teachers weren't prepared for remote learning. There was no consistency among the teachers, no real expectations about the schoolwork that was required or any deadlines. She didn't even have any quizzes or tests while remote learning. The teachers were quite disconnected with my daughter. My daughter went from having a very structured and challenging classroom environment to little to no remote learning. With remote learning, she was the one always taking the lead to check in with her teachers to ask for work, but they were not very responsive. When they finally started assigning work, she felt it was very little and less challenging as compared to the work she was doing in the classroom. In mid-May, the teachers started doing weekly 15-minute check-ins, and there was no clear agenda for these check-ins. They were general conversation, not academic related. Only one of her 7 teachers utilized Zoom to conduct twice-a-week classes, although she had daily classes with him prior to remote learning. He would also do instructional videos and send links to the students. This teacher also taught college remotely, so he was probably more familiar with remote learning than the other teachers. In addition, SATs, ACTs, and college visits were all canceled, so my daughter has a lot of anxiety entering her senior year. I was not able to establish connectedness with the school community. I emailed the principal and superintendent with my observations, as well as completed many surveys. I did not reach out to my daughter's teachers for help and support. Again, my daughter was age 16 when she transitioned to remote learning and was fully capable of reaching out to her teachers on her own for help and support. I guided and supported her in initiating contact with her teachers, but thought it was important for her to own this given her age and preparedness for college. In the end, we're extremely dissatisfied with the remote learning, as it was mostly non-existent for her, and we're hopeful that there is a significant improvement in her senior year.
Okay, so those were 2 different experiences that parents went through. And the first one was quite successful, where students were able to work on academics, grow. Teachers were there to support, and then another which was less successful. I do have to make a comment that the district, the teachers learned a lot from the experience that happened in the spring, and the remote learning that we have right now is quite different. And it seems like students are enjoying it. We keep students accountable and responsible for their learning and for being active participants in the classrooms. And I think we all needed this time to learn, to grow, and do more even than is required to make sure that all the students get the education that they deserve. I will move quickly to the next stage that I believe we all went through, the stage of empathy, where all the sides were able to understand and feel with each other, because we all went through this. I myself, I am an educator, I'm a parent, and I felt both sides and I understood what we went through. So the first stage, of course, was awareness, consideration of the other, kindness, but by example. That's what we wanted, not just in words, but kind of to reach out to the parent, to make sure that they know that we understand them and we are there to help. So kindness by example, through action, humanism, understanding the circumstances we all were in. And that was important from both sides, parents to understand teachers, teachers to understand parents. Social presence. It was impossible to some extent even to find some way to connect with families because they were either working or they didn't have the technology. But nevertheless, we were able to establish this presence and connected us within our school community. And I'm teaching in Reed Middle School, and I was very happy and proud that our school was able to create the new online community where people felt connected and felt present. Future prospects of integrating online learning into secondary education. So what we learned, present time. This virus, this pandemic did make a lot of positive changes. First of all, we have more teachers who consider themselves now technology savvy teachers, teachers who feel more comfortable with technology. We have both teachers and learners who go beyond the minimum. We understand that in these circumstances, we have to do more than is required. And differentiated instruction. Honestly, this was one of my achievements that I felt very proud of, because sometimes in in-person learning, when you have 15 or more students in the classroom, it's so difficult to give this differentiated instruction and give enough attention to all the students and make sure that all the needs are covered. During the remote learning, I had a lot of one-on-one sessions with my students where I was able to give them help that they needed and help with their specific needs. I had a lot of students who were reaching out, or who I was reaching out, because I realized they are struggling with specific things, and this is just their struggle. So we have established this one-on-one sessions where they were able to ask me questions, and I was able to lead them through step by step to simple things like how to create the Google document, how to share it with me, how to reach out to other teachers, how to find their Zoom links. That was the number one thing. I don't know where to find them. I have a ton of emails. So how to organize their mailboxes. So this is present time, future possibilities. I think what COVID-19 showed us through this remote online learning, how we can connect not only locally, but locally first of all, but globally. We can bring in new and different instructors from any part of the world, time permitting, of course, but we can make this learning so engaging and so much more meaningful to our students. We teachers found new methods of teaching and learning, new ways how to establish this connectedness with students, how to reach out to them, and new ways how to develop self-directed learners. That was always the goal, at least one of my goals as a teacher, to make my students feel they are totally capable to direct themselves, to be self-reliable in a way, to be self-organized. And COVID did help and push them out of their comfort zones to the level where they are becoming more and more self-direct learners. I remember that I have 30 minutes and I'm trying to squeeze in, And at this point, I would like to end with a quote that I believe is very meaningful in the circumstances, that technology will not replace great teachers, but technology in the hands of great teachers can be transformational. And that's what I believe we are trying to reach, and that's the phase that we are on right now. Thank you so much for your attention, and if there are questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
All right, thank you, Natalia. If anybody has any questions, they can put them in their chat box now. We'll wait a minute to give you all a couple minutes to ask some questions if you like, Natalia. That was a wonderful presentation, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm sure it's a big learning curve for all of us. You know, we're watching our grandchildren and our children go through this, of what you all are talking about. And each story that we hear is very uniquely different from every different part, you know. All right. So, Gerald, why don't we go ahead and let you get started? And then if we have any other questions for you, Natalia, we'll do it at the end. So go ahead, Gerald.
Thank you. And thanks to Natalia for, you're giving me a hard session to follow with that. That was fantastic to hear the perspective from secondary education. So it's so important for us who work in higher ed to stay connected and aware, because, the students who are working through the secondary system are our future students. So we need to know what's going on for sure. Thank you, Steve, and thanks everybody for being here today and inviting me. This is quite an honor, as always, to work with OLLI. So I will share my screen here in a second and pull up my PowerPoint, and we can get started with that. Okay, so there we go. Looks like we're good to go. So implications of technology for higher education specifically. As you heard in my intro, I do work at Mass College of Liberal Arts up here in North Adams. And yes, my day job is Director of Academic Technology, and I am also an adjunct instructor at the college in the philosophy department. So I get to see a whole lot of faculty, both as a faculty colleague, but also when I put on my academic technology hat and have the role of really supporting the faculty in using and learning technology. So my presentation and my part of the talk today is going to be, as you'd expect, maybe just a smidge more technology focused, given the nature of the work that I do. But hopefully we'll, have some interesting things to think about, not just about pressing buttons, but also, understanding the connections, how our society and our social systems are influenced by that. So I wanted to start by thinking about the term, that we're using, technology, that word itself. It can be a little misleading to talk about technology this, technology that, when really what we're referring to is a really complicated set of interrelated systems. There are specific technology tools, there are specific technology companies, there are uses of technology, habits and practices and customs even. So it's not all about bits and bytes, but it's very much a human practice when we talk about technology. And that's really important to understand a lot of why we do what we do with it. So I'm going to talk about 4 maybe angles into this mess, this interrelated metasystem, which is crazy complicated. One aspect or element is going to be the idea of expanding access, specifically expanding access to higher education across students in our communities, because that's one very significant way that higher ed is bringing in the use of technology and having an impact there. At the same time, I'm also going to talk about the factor of contracting access to higher education and the ways that technology can actually have that effect sometimes as well. I'm going to talk about opportunities and advantages in higher education. And again, those that are brought about by this growing expansion of technology in all of our ways of doing things. And I'm also going to talk about the challenges and dangers that bringing technology into higher education can pose for us. So you know, it's going to be a multifaceted whirlwind tour here, and no simple answers, but it's going to be really interesting, I think. So I want to start off with one of the positive aspects, the idea of expanding access, ways that technology accomplishes this type of thing in higher ed. So, you know, a lot of it is going to be overlapping with some of the things that Natalia mentioned happen in the K-12 space as well. So one thing that is really a big deal to me in the work that I do with faculty is the ways that technology really enhances accessibility for students with disabilities, different ways of learning, and you know, that the use of technology is one of the best ways that we have been able to provide education and information and just learning generally to students who historically might have been left out, or for whom it would have been really much more difficult or sometimes even impossible to access learning. And at the same time, I also want to, you know, shout out to the whole concept of multimedia as sort of also living in this quadrant of expanding access, so that, you know, text, I'm an academic, you know, I love the written word, but text is one medium for education, and technology has really boosted other media, the spoken word, video, animation, right? All of these other possibilities for conveying information and having conversations and learning. So, you know, I'm just shouting out to these standards, the WCAG 2.1, I guess maybe they're 2.2 now, standards. These are a set of technology standards that just define how to make websites accessible to a blind student, or making videos accessible to a deaf student, or, you know, those sorts of things. So it's really hard to underestimate in the work that I do what a big deal it is, and the many ways that technology has done a great deal to expand the access of higher education to students who's historically been sort of locked out in a lot of ways. Of course, remote learning. I barely need to say more there at this point. We're all familiar with the ways that remote learning and also asynchronous learning can expand access. You know, this is certainly a matter of socioeconomic expansion. You know, it's also geographic, right? Students who are, you know, in remote areas are, you know, through online learning, often able to access programs that it would have been prohibitive for them if they had to physically travel to get to a campus or to a college. So, you know, both of these are sort of really significant elements, and these are the ones that get most of the attention and the sort of the headlines, I think, at this stage. And they deserve it because they're pretty big. I also think it's really important to mention here open access content and social and interactive content. So folks are probably familiar with the concept of open access, right? That you know, materials can be designated to share freely without worrying about copyright infringement and that sort of business. You know, there's a lot of interest in higher ed in developing textbooks, series of textbooks that are really high quality, that are licensed not under a traditional copyright license, but are licensed under various open access licenses, so that they can be made available to students at very low cost, or often even for no cost whatsoever. So these types of materials are really significant for expanding access, you know, for students who can't spend a lot of money, can't spend, you know, $200 on a traditional textbook for the biology class, and another $150 for the economics textbook, and another $95 for the 3 novels they need to read for English, et cetera, et cetera. Here also, I want to mention that second item in the yellow quadrant, the social and interactive content. The screenshot there is from a tool called Hypothesis, which is a really neat open source tool that allows students to annotate on top of websites. So for a professor, right, who may be assigning students to look at something online, to read a blog or a news article or any other type of academic article, tools like this allow students to literally highlight pieces of a website, leave comments off to the side, and have sort of online conversations in real time on digital documents. Again, this is tools like this represent a really great way for having authentic interactions with classmates and instructors with digital resources. All right, so here, this has been the happy slide, talking about the ways technology expands access in higher ed. So next, I do want to look at some of the ways that technologies can sometimes do the opposite, right, and actually restrict or contract people's access to higher education. Well, it's possible for the use of technologies to lock students into proprietary content, software and formats. That red icon, folks may remember Flash Video from some years ago. That was a pretty popular format for video at a certain point in the early 2000s. If you created, content using that format, it's not clear if it's any good to anybody these days, unless you have a really kind of way back machine to play it. The other screenshot there is from a publishing company, an academic publishing company's website, which shall remain nameless. But the idea that students are less and less being offered the chance to purchase, to own outright materials, right? But instead are being offered ways to simply rent or subscribe to texts or other resources for a lower cost, right? And that's the hook. But of course, then, at the end of the semester, the access goes away. And whereas traditionally, right, when I was an undergraduate, I purchased my textbooks in physical format. When the semester was done, I kept them, right? I still owned those materials and those resources, and I could read them again. I usually didn't, but the point was, right, that I could, and that there is some value, right, conceptually, for a student to keep access to their learning materials and not lose access to those, once the course is over and the grades have gone into the grade book. So this is conceptually complicated, right? It's certainly a good thing for students to not have to spend exorbitant amounts purchasing their books, but is there a trade-off here that serves in the long run to contract access? Another really important way that technology can, if we're not careful, restrict people's access to higher education is to fail to recognize that simply having the right hardware and simply having the right connectivity, internet connection, it can be a really huge and very wide barrier. And Natalia, I'm so glad that you mentioned that in your part, because it's the same issue that we face in higher ed that you're facing in K-12. Absolutely. Students who do not have internet at home, or maybe they have sort of a limited number of minutes, right, to spend on data on their cell phones. And maybe a cell phone is the one and only device that they have access to log in and look at their class website and try to type a paper on, right? These are not trivial barriers, right? These are hugely important ways that we need to reckon with. We need to understand that so many of our students face this as a real barrier, and we need to figure out how to get them past that barrier in a way that's equitable. And finally, I also want to mention on this slide the sort of rich get richer risk, as I put it alliteratively. Just that the work I do, right, is academic technology here at the college, and so this is high on my mind. Namely, that colleges and universities that are already well off have the money to hire a whole lot of academic technology people. They have, the resources to purchase a whole lot of very cool tools, right? People who can, run the cameras when professors are standing up and delivering a video lecture. People who can then edit those videos and make them look professional, right? That screenshot there on the yellow quadrant is of a very cool glass whiteboard, right? That's specially designed so that, if a professor is writing with marker on that glass whiteboard, it can be manipulated very easily in post-production video editing so that it looks like, the students can see right through it and it looks all very snazzy. That sort of thing, right? For students, having online experiences in their education, it can, if we're not careful, sort of start to widen a gap between the type of experience students get when they're logging on to their classes in a university or college that doesn't have money, and maybe they're just getting a lot of text and some very basic video, talking head video like this, versus students who are learning online at a more prestigious or wealthier university, where they're getting really high quality, high resolution content, interactives, Khan Academy level type of things. All right, enough of the downers. I'm going to switch back next slide and think positive again. So let's take a look at some opportunities and advantages that can be brought to the table in higher education by technology. Well, for one thing, and I'm stepping back into my academic hat here, just the fact is that there are whole new fields of study that exist only because of technology. And that in itself is fantastic. There's a field called computational linguistics, right? That didn't exist before we had the type of computational power and devices to do this type of analysis on texts. User experience design, thinking about the fine and performing arts areas. Bioinformatics, right? Thinking about the sciences. These are just a couple of, a handful of examples of fields that exist because we have the technologies that we do today. And that is an expansion of higher ed, and I think in and of itself a good thing. I do also want to acknowledge that technology helps us reduce gatekeeping in higher education specifically, and encourages us to be a bit more egalitarian in the ways that we conduct ourselves in academic communities. The screenshot is probably far too small to really make out in that square, I'm sorry. But it's a screenshot from my phone from Twitter. I'm a big Twitter person. And one of the great things about Twitter, in my experience, is that you can find communities of educators who share conversations and share questions and problems and try to troubleshoot issues with each other, talk about practice and theory, and all in real time. It's really a wonderful experience, and it is a very leveling experience, I would say. In higher ed, there's a bit of a history of elitism. It's kind of, you have to acknowledge that there's some bit of that that's been part of higher ed. And social media in particular has done a lot to sort of open up conversations so that, the professors at the R1 universities are not just talking to each other at their professional conferences and, maybe talking to 10 or 12 other people, but these really important conversations in higher education happen in public, and anybody can join in and be a part of that. And I consider that to be a fantastic opportunity that technology has helped to enable. And I also want to note, and this is, I'm going to say a little bit, folks might be ambivalent about whether it's really an advantage or an opportunity or not, but I did put it on this slide. The idea that technology is sort of almost forcing us to rethink and update some of our older models of how we understand intellectual property, how we share our creative work with each other, and copyright issues, all of that sort of thing. The screenshot here is of a website hosted by Cornell University where people can post sort of preprint versions of academic papers that they've written. So if, you know, some scientists have written up a review of their research before it's gone through peer review to be published formally, they can post the preprint here on this website, and people can freely look at it and access it. Folks may be well aware that access to research is oftentimes kind of locked down in higher education. Journals, academic journals, have a tendency to charge fairly large amounts of money in order to access articles. So folks who have an interest in their research reaching a wider audience are kind of excited about prospects like this. All right. So there are some you know, new opportunities and advantages that are worth mentioning in the higher ed sphere. I'll leave you with a challenges slide before we move on to the next stage of the conversation. And big on everyone's mind, I have no doubt, is the challenge and the danger around information privacy. Certainly the more we use online services and tools, the more we worry about this. You know, certainly secondary schools have their own unique sort of concerns and ways of dealing, you know, legal considerations with student privacy. Higher ed has a slightly different set of legal restraints, but in both cases, we need to be very thoughtful and conscientious about ways that we protect students' privacy when they're online. And it becomes very complex very quickly when, you know, a college, for example, may have very good practices in-house for, you know, protecting student data, names, you know, personally identifiable information, et cetera. But, you know, if that college also has partnerships with software vendors, it multiplies and gets much more complicated, right? So then you have to worry about, well, how does Google handle student data? What are their protections? How does Microsoft handle it? How does my LMS handle it? Are we using an e-portfolio of some kind? How do they handle it, et cetera, et cetera? So, I don't know if anybody recognizes that little green icon there, but another concept here is that, you know, in higher ed, a lot of institutions are interested in remote proctoring of exams. So, you know, if we have students taking an exam at home, for example, how can we sort of ensure that a student doesn't have a book open next to them, right? Or if they're looking at a different website while they're taking an exam. So there are companies out there that offer a service of remote proctoring, and there are definitely privacy concerns that have been raised in higher ed about those kind of practices as well. Similar, just general information privacy, not specific to higher ed, but about technology overall. The more different services you log into, the bigger what they call the attack surface, right? The more possibilities there are for bad actors to potentially scoop up information and do all the bad things that we've seen in the news for years now. Another real significant challenge and danger in using technology is, of course, doing civic engagement in the public sphere online. You know, certainly in higher ed, we have lots of challenging, sometimes sensitive conversations with students in our classrooms. We talk about topics that may be controversial. We sort of encourage conversations where people think through multiple sides of an issue and maybe articulate ideas, not necessarily that, you know, they'll all end up holding, but maybe, you know, we need to address, right? In cases, you know, a lot of faculty are interested in using social media, blogging, some of these public-facing type of interactions where students may put words on the page and they become publicly viewable. You know, it becomes really important to be thoughtful about that kind of thing, right? There are lots of ways that we've seen over the years that people's words on social media can lead to lots of real-world consequences, and they're not always good consequences. The other concept here to me is interesting, that the more we spend time talking to each other online, we are sort of moving towards an idea that these corporately owned spaces are where we talk to each other. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, you know, even, but, you know, these are not the public square, right? Social media is not the public square as we've historically understood it. These are digital places that are owned by companies that have profit motives and maybe other motives, right? So the more that we consider our human interactions with each other in higher education, the more that we consider basically just we do them in these places, we're sort of absorbing the idea that these places and the ways they work are determined not by us, right, but by those, by someone else. So screenshots again, tiny, but the left screenshot is from a bot tracker. It's a service online that tries to determine whether a Twitter user is a real person or some kind of a bot. And then that right screenshot is an example of a tweet by a particular someone who said something pretty outrageous, and Twitter decided to flag it, right, and to tell people, well, this tweet violated some of our rules about glorifying violence, but it's still here, and people can still read it. So that's an example, right, of this is not the public square. This is, Twitter's a company, and they make decisions in the best interest of their company about how speech works there. Last thing I'm going to mention is the possibility that our use of technology risks reinforcing inequities, potentially under the guise of objectivity. So here's a specific example that'll take me a minute to talk through. So here are two very tall images. All right, and I hope you can see that they are former President Barack Obama and Mitch McConnell from the Senate. So someone on Twitter did a very interesting experiment. You probably know that you can put images into a tweet. But of course, these are really tall images. And so what Twitter does, it'll sort of crop it down automatically. And so when you send the tweet with a really tall image, there's an algorithm that decides which part of the image gets shown and which part, gets hidden. Well, this person had a suspicion about how the algorithm would work in terms of which part of the image got cropped and which part of the image got shown. And indeed, they found out that the automatic Twitter algorithm, given both of those images, in both cases would prefer to put Mitch McConnell's face up top and crop out President Obama's face. And this is, pretty significant. A lot of other people have replicated this since then, done it with images of other people of different races. So it's not just about being famous or political. Did it with even characters from The Simpsons, right? So not even real human faces, but, cartoon faces. And people have replicated and confirmed that this particular algorithm has a preference to crop out a black face and show a white face by default. So this is just a really interesting example of ways that, technology presents itself to us as kind of objective, right? It's code. And yet code can, if we're not careful, sort of replicate and magnify some of our existing inequalities of human beings. So on that note, I'll stop for a second and sort of stop sharing my screen, and we can expand the conversation. Thank you.
All right, I'm unmuted now. Okay, so I have several questions for you. The first one's from George Smith, and this is probably for both of you. Do you think there are any parallels in the experiences, problems, etc., between those transitioning to remote learning and to homeschooling? This might more go to Natalia.
Yeah, it seems like it's more probably for me. Obviously it will have both either remote learning or homeschooling will have their own challenges. But for some parallels, I can probably name parents will have a bigger burden to carry with both remote learning and homeschooling, and with homeschooling probably even more, because they have to organize their child or children's learning space. They have to organize and create the routines and schedules, structure their students' learning. With remote learning, school takes more responsibility, but still parents' help is huge and is very essential and important. With home learning, it will be crucial because that whole responsibility will just lay on parents' shoulders. And one more thing, for the homeschooling too, like the curriculum, to choose the right curriculum, to make sure that students have and are able to get the education that is required by the state requirements. Because after the COVID is done, students will have to come back to normal, hopefully traditional ways where we are able to keep them accountable and keep the high standards of our education.
All right, thank you, Natalia. The next question is from Louise. Gerald, can you define those civic engagement terms as example, sock puppets, doxing, etc.?
Sure. Yeah, no, and I'm always at risk of using terms without defining them, so thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, so if as I'm talking, I remember a couple of them, but I'll try and pull back that slide so I make sure I don't miss any. So doxing is kind of a practice where someone's private contact information is made public. So, you know, this is something, unfortunately, that people have suffered mostly on social media. If someone, you know, makes a statement and sort of angers someone else, it's possible, right, to sort of go on a hunt, right? A bad actor might choose to sort of try and find someone's home address or their home telephone number, and then sort of post that information publicly on the internet with the goal of sort of encouraging harassment of the person. So that's the concept of doxing. Sock puppet, that's a term used to describe a sort of type of social media account where it may be run by a real person, so it's not a bot, but one person might be in charge of, I don't know, 100 different accounts on Twitter or on Facebook, for example, and sort of just copy and paste content, you know, not really making meaningful posts, but amplifying a message, often political. So those are those couple of terms. I remember I mentioned swatting. That's another kind of horrific idea. It's that someone falsely calls the police and sends them to someone's home with the aim, again, of causing them harm in response to, you know, something that they've said online. Yeah, it can be a nasty world out there in some ways. So that's, you know, we don't want to be launching ourselves and our students out into that world without some thoughtful preparation.
All right, thank you. Natalia, the question is that at the elementary and middle school level, what problems did you have this year as far as kids attending and their abilities to do the work like they did when they were face-to-face?
During the spring time, when we first went remotely with the students, the attendance unfortunately wasn't required. So what was required for students to accomplish their work, their assignments, but there was no requirement that the students had to be with us live with the teachers. So that created a lot of confusion because some of the students decided, okay, if I don't have to be present, I will just choose and pick what I want to do. And it was very difficult to reach out to those students. Right now, the situation is much better. Our principal just recently shared with us information that we have better attendance right now than we had in January when we were in person in the school. I don't know what the reason for that is. Maybe students just felt too isolated. It was way too long of a period of time for them to be at home, not to be able to socialize, not to be able to be with the teachers, not to be able to, you know, learn the way they used to. So now I feel like they are very eager, you know, to dive into this learning process, even if it's online. Even with me, mostly all of my students are present every day, and they are participating very actively. They are handing in their assignments. So we do have a huge shift and a huge difference from what was happening in spring when we first got closed, the schools closed, and what we have and what we're experiencing right now. And I hope this will continue, and we'll have the same high numbers when we go back and we are in person with students.
All right, thank you, Natalia. Gerald, do you have more of a presentation that you want to do? If not, I have more questions for you.
No, questions are good. I'm ready for questions.
Okay, so the next one is something, this is from me now.
Okay.
So having done your class on artificial intelligence,
Yes.
I have to ask, and a lot of people here didn't do it, but those of us who are familiar with the subject, you did a full class on that. And my question is, how is that advanced by what we're going through now? Because that's something that these are the kind of times that change things.
Sure. Oh my, do we have another hour or two?
No, but I know it's a complex subject, but I'm sitting here thinking of the things we used to talk about.
Sure,
So.
yes. I mean, so certainly one important thing to think about with artificial intelligence is the way that it learns. That's huge. And, you know, generally speaking, right, it's total simplification, but, you know, artificial intelligence learns how to be intelligent by sort of looking at huge amounts of data, right? So in order to get better and better AI, technology companies need to get huger and huger sets of data, behavioral data. How do humans work? What do they do from day to day, hour to hour, minute to minute? So certainly the more we interact with more systems throughout more of our day, we are generating more and more data, which is kind of like coal that they shovel in, you know, to the furnace of the AI, right? So certainly, I would expect that your Googles and all of those top tier, you know, Microsofts and IBMs and those companies that are interested in the AI space, they are you know, benefiting in a sense, right, from just the fact that we are all producing so much more data these days because we are just spending so much more of our lives doing things online, showing them our patterns. Right, even you know, walking around the physical world, the GPS on our phones, right? It's all data. It's all data that can go towards an AI so that it can learn to be more precise and accurate and predict what we want and give it to us.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
So the next question is from George Smith. He writes, Steve would know better than me. He's in one of my other classes, but I think OLLI's experienced higher attendance in Zoom form than before with in person only. The answer is, I can answer that. The answer is yes, but part of the reason for that is because this is what's going on right now. And when we normally do classes in the summer, we only run a few classes in the morning, not to compete with what goes on in this area the rest of the time. But we have formed a committee, Gerald, to talk about what to do after this is over eventually, because one of the things that we think our future will hold is we will be able to do some classes where we do them together. We've got many people that have become part of our community that are from other parts. And if I would open up this up, I'm sure there are people here that I would recognize. There's a lady from Texas who's here. We have people, my cousin from California, a lot of people from Florida. I was doing my class from Florida before I came up here. And when I'm going home in another week, and we have to go home early this year, I'll be doing my class from Florida again. So that's the difference as far as it answers George's question. I have another question here from Howard and Shirley Shapiro. This question is for Gerald. For those of us who have been out of school for some time, that's a polite way of saying that, Howard and Shirley, we have not had access to the same level of experience with technology that the younger generation has experienced. Without expecting those of us in our senior years to go through significant educational training, how can we maintain our connections via technology and not left out? Before you answer, one of you got to have a good experience relationship with your grandchildren. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I mean, that's so important just in general, right? Great question. I mean, I think you're right. You're onto something here that in some ways it's easier for folks that maybe, in the working world dealing with this stuff, or, but, if it's not part of your day to day, how do you keep those connections, right? And, I think my only answer that I can come up with there is you don't try to do everything. You find one or two channels, you find one or two methods. You don't try to learn the whole universe of technology or even the whole universe of social media, or, you find a thing that works and you use it,
So in our case, we started in springtime doing these classes on Zoom, and we didn't have any idea whether it would be successful or not. Well, the answer is it's been very successful. We have had much higher attendance in every class. This class currently had 55 people when we started. So, and we've had classes with 90 people. We've been doing lectures online, with more prominent people, and we've had 1,000 people show up for them. So I think the Zoom technology has actually provided an access that we never had before. It's been very beneficial to everybody, I'm going to ask Natalia a question. So my other question is this: how much are you finding, the Berkshires has its difficulty with internet access. And we had a fellow teaching a class this April who lived in Savoy. Now, we have people who are not from the Berkshires here. And he had to drive in somewhere in his car and do his class from his car. So I'm assuming you're having a similar problem, or you had that problem, where kids that didn't have internet access. You have to unmute yourself, Natalia.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. You just remind me our experience this summer, because we ran after school program this year online, and we also didn't know if it's going to work, because obviously parents need to go to work. They want their children somewhere in some safe space. But actually it worked, but we did have those problems where our teachers, and it was a good practice for us, we usually had two teachers on the Zoom call, on the Zoom meeting. So I started to have a class, and then I realized my co-teacher is not there, and she's texting me, I don't have internet at home right now. I'm running to the laundry, and she lives close to the laundromat. So then I see her popping in, and here she is in the laundromat, but the internet worked. It was perfect. It was actually better than what she had at home. So she was very creative and very resourceful. She used her neighbor laundromat to access that internet and be able to be with the students. And obviously, both sides, teachers and students experience these difficulties. I'm very happy that right now I have the opportunity to teach from school. So I'm actually right now in my classroom, and I'm able to go to work, and I'm not worried about my internet access. But we do experience some difficulties with students who do have bad internet access, even though the school provided everybody with a Chromebook and with the with embedded internet access. And it's still not perfect, but it's better than not to have one. But the most difficult is when you're trying to have students engaged in the discussion and you cannot hear them. When they're trying to say something, when they're trying to participate and they're just breaking up. So we are using chat, as you guys, a lot. I can hear you, so just type in your question, because I still want them to participate. But I think this will be the ongoing process and ongoing problem for quite a long.
So two things. Gerald has a question, which I'm going to ask you in a minute, but two things for both of you. So one of the problems that we've had at OLLI is that we have people that have been done very successful classes for us that are face-to-face, as both of you have done. So we have had instructors that do not want to work in Zoom. So my question to both of you, and then I'm going to ask Gerald's question, is, do both of you find in your both respective environments that you have people that who would normally teach a class are not willing to be instructors on Zoom? And I don't need names because that's not, And I'm sure both of you have seen this problem, right?
I'll answer that one first.
Okay.
Sure. Yes. I'll just say yes. Okay. I have seen there are folks that are fantastic, in-person, face-to-face professors, but looking at this prospect, just have no interest none whatsoever in taking all this on, right? And so, yeah, there have been people who have made a decision, not to do it. They could have, but they chose not to. And, I have to respect that. It's I suppose I would say that's an honest choice. And, it's if the opposite, if the alternative was to do it and do it poorly, knowing that, they weren't going to, have the oomph for it, I have to say that, it's probably the choice that I would respect.
So this was probably your question now to Natalia, and it goes along with the next thing I was going to ask anyway. So I'll read your question. Gerald, this is to you, Natalia. I'd like to ask a question, Natalia. What kind of professional development generally have you found that teachers most wish they had access to? You have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, because it's actually very important. We had a lot of discussion among teachers group when we are preparing for this new school year. So what do we need? And we filed the survey where we shared our thoughts. And of course, knowing that we are going to teach classes online via Zoom, that was number one request from teachers, what they wanted professional development in, to be able to learn Zoom quickly and all the tools, how we can engage students to make this learning experience easier for them and more enjoyable. So Zoom, then we implemented Canvas as a new platform. Before Canvas, we had Google Classroom. So that was another learning point for teachers. They just mastered, in a way, Google Classroom, and then quickly we had to relearn, reteach, learn something new, learn Canvas platform. So that was, we actually had professional development opportunities with Canvas, but a lot of was done on our own. You have to put in the time, explore it on your own, because everybody learns in different ways. Find what works for you. Me personally, I'm enjoying right now this online learning because I'm learning a lot and I feel like I'm growing. But we do have teachers for whom this online learning is a torture in a way. They find it difficult to establish this connectedness with students. They feel like they are more productive when they have students in the classroom. And it does work difficult for a lot of our teachers. But again, it's a learning curve that we are all taking, and hopefully we'll get better and better with learning, finding the ways how to use this technology.
So I'm going to just explain one thing, because I do a class that's a discussion class where I'm a moderator, and it happens to be on today's headlines. So the purpose of the class is not like the two of you that gave a presentation. The purpose is I'll raise a subject, and then we have 40, 50 people who come. The way we control it is with the blue hand. In other words, for those, in other words, instead of them writing into the chat box, because most of us who are, I'm not going to say older, but are, as someone asked a question about, still in the learning curve, it's easier to talk. So that's how we control it. The second thing is, as we have here, we have another co-host who helps control things, and we have somebody back in the office if there's a technical problem. In this case, it's Ray. So we have layers of that. The next thing that we did is, starting in the spring, we held seminars for the students, for our members, so that they could come and learn Zoom. And then at the beginning of each period of teaching, we have sessions where we have people teaching the instructors how to use Zoom. And we find that once people have done it more, they adapt to it and have become better at it. We find that the more they do it, the more accustomed they are to it. And like you said, Natalia, we're learning something new every day about this. That's why I asked Gerald a question about artificial intelligence, because he taught us a lot about that. And I thought, I'm sitting here thinking about how it's applicable to what we're doing today. So, is there anybody else in the audience who has a question they'd like to ask? Okay, if not, it's close to 5 o'clock and we need to cut it off. So Gerald and Natalia, thank you both very much for coming today. We appreciate it. So next week, our topic is going to be surveillance capitalism, and our presenter will be Albert Anderson. So we look forward to seeing you then. And again, thank you both very much for coming, and thank everybody for coming today.
And thank you for having us. It was my honor to
Oh, Natalia, it
present.
was a pleasure to have you and Gerald. Believe
Yes, the same.
me. Yeah.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Natalia. Thank you, Joe. And thank you, Russell, for facilitating.
Yeah.
Thanks for a good class, guys. Nice.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.